Have you ever been at the shopping centre and someone has waved or said hello to you like they are your oldest friend, but you don't have the foggiest idea who they are? Maybe you need to awkwardly ask their name and then it all becomes clear and you realise that you do know them after all. But just seeing them out of the usual context created the initial confusion. Well, everyone experiences this, right? Of course, nothing too unusual there. But what if this was a daily occurrence and the people you don't recognise are not just passing acquaintances, but people you might see regularly or even family members? Well, this is something that many autistic people experience on a daily basis. Welcome to the world of prosopagnosia or face blindness. Hi, I'm Phil, a late diagnosed autistic adult, and it's my aim to help advocate for autistic adults and particularly those who are a bit older and have lived their entire lives without the knowledge of their autism. If that's you, welcome. Or maybe you are the friend or family member of an autistic person. Or you might be someone who has always been a bit different and you are starting to think autism might be the answer. I hope through these videos we can walk through some common but maybe lesser known autistic traits to help demystify the subject of autism in older adults. Last time we had a chat about aphantasia and the fact that many autistic people see mental imagery in ways that are different to non-autistic people, including for some autistic people the total lack of internal imagery altogether. Today I want to extend that concept out a bit and talk about the fact that many autistic people can either find it difficult to remember faces or even fail to recognise people they know well. This face blindness is known as prosopagnosia or face agnosia and is present in about 2 to 3% of the general population. So the first thing to note is that it is not just confined to autistic people. But having said that, face blindness is actually present in about 35 to 40% of autistic people. And beyond that number, many more autistic people who do not experience prosopagnosia to a clinically diagnosable degree still experience some degree of facial recognition difficulty. So first up, prosopagnosia or face blindness is a neurological condition characterised by the inability to recognise faces, including those of familiar individuals. There are two types of prosopagnosia. First, congenital, otherwise known as developmental prosopagnosia, is lifelong and is manifest from early childhood. And acquired, which is the result of damage to the occipital temporal lobe of the brain due to acquired brain injury, stroke, or degenerative conditions such as dementia. The term prosopagnosia is derived from the Greek prospon for face, a for not, and nostos, to be known, or quite literally, face not known, and was first used by German neurologist Joachim Bodemer in 1947. Okay, so what are some common experiences people with prosopagnosia might have? You may be unable to describe a person's face, or be unable to recognise people even if they are close friends, colleagues, or even family members. Maybe you don't even recognise your own face in photographs or in the mirror. You may get confused when watching TV or movies or even playing games. A child may even approach strangers believing that person to be a family member. Someone living with prosopagnosia may avoid meeting new people or become disoriented in a crowd. People with prosopagnosia may use other cues to tell people apart, such as voice, body shape, posture, hair, walking gait or sound of footsteps, clothes, even things like mouth noises can be clues. Prosopagnosia can also be broken down into two subgroups. Firstly, associative prosopagnosia, where you may be unable to recognise people's faces or distinguish one face from the next, no matter how well you know them. This is more commonly associated with acquired prosopagnosia. And aperceptive prosopagnosia, where you might be able to distinguish individual faces, but you are unable to recognise people's facial expressions. Those of us who are autistic might get a bit of a light bulb moment here, as this inability to recognise facial expressions is a common autistic experience. This is more often a feature of developmental prosopagnosia. As we noted earlier, prosopagnosia is common in autistic people. So why might this be the case, and how does this reduced facial recognition ability interact with and complicate the autistic experience? Firstly, it's important to note that face blindness can also be present in other neurodivergent conditions such as ADHD in higher rates than the general population. Autism is a spectrum condition. This means that autistic people experience a range of traits, and the intensity of these traits will be different in each individual. A quick note at this point to clarify that this idea of a spectrum does not imply someone is less or more autistic than someone else, only that they will have different experiences to each other. So there is no such thing as being a little bit autistic, as the common misunderstanding goes. Okay, rant over. Now, this spectrum of traits can also mean a higher prevalence of other conditions such as aphantasia, which is the inability to see internal imagery. This can also mean the inability to see faces in our mind's eye, which can complicate the ability to recognise faces. Added to this is that many autistic people can experience a processing delay, so the time it takes to process a face and recognise it might be much slower for an autistic person, even if they don't experience the full effects of prosopagnosia. Many autistic people also have difficulty making eye contact. So it is also possible that this can also mean that the focus is either drawn away from the face entirely or focused intently on a specific part of the face, like the mouth, nose, or ear. Either way, the autistic person, while interacting, is often not focused on the face as a whole, which could diminish the imprinting of that person's face in memory. Conversely, it could be implied that this difficulty with facial recognition may also affect eye contact negatively. One of the core features of autism is difficulty with social interaction. When you add facial recognition challenges on top of that, it compounds the already significant struggles, making social situations even more confusing and harder to navigate. And as with many aspects of the autistic experience, the way traits show up can vary widely. While some autistic people may have difficulty recognising faces, others are hyper-recognisers, able to identify and remember faces with remarkable accuracy. So how do I experience prosopagnosia? Well, first up, I would say my experience, while significant, is definitely not severe. It's not black and white as to whether I will recognise someone. I can recognise people sometimes depending on situations, so I would not say that I always don't recognise people. And often there may be some recognition, but that might be shrouded in doubt. But at the same time, my recognition methods are not primarily based on seeing someone's face. This can mean that I might recognise someone before Trish does, for instance, particularly if the person is looking away from us. In some ways, if someone is not facing me, it is easier, as I can then analyse their other features like body shape, height, posture, hairstyle and colour, clothing, walking stride, etc. And I can do this without the distraction of seeing their face. In fact, during the pandemic, when we were all wearing masks, I actually found it good because firstly, it was in some ways easier to recognise people, as all the faces were hidden, so I did not have to process all that information and could just focus on the cues that maybe I found easier. But also it levelled the facial recognition playing field. So everyone had issues, and for once maybe my recognition was superior, as I was practiced at recognition without using faces. If someone is looking at me or walking in my direction, I will invariably wait for them to acknowledge me first. Many times, however, when the other person has not made that move of recognition, I may have reluctantly made the first move in making a greeting. But so often, it has soon become obvious that the person I thought it was not who it turned out to be, only for me to then make some weird apology and back away awkwardly, leading to an ever greater reluctance to make the first move of greeting or recognition the next time I see someone. I am also much more likely to recognise someone's voice, so it might be that recognition comes in the instant after you speak to me. In fact, I often say that for me, everyone in the world fits into about 10 different faces. Now, this is an exaggeration, but you get the idea. Watching TV can be interesting as I am constantly getting characters confused if they have the same hair colour, for instance, making it hard to follow plot lines. This means I'm often asking Trish, is that the same person as so-and-so in the last scene? To which the answer is, no, they look completely different. The other interesting thing that I find is that I often get people's race confused. For example, I often cannot easily distinguish between someone from Asia from someone from Eastern Europe if that person also has dark hair. Now, as I mentioned last time in the podcast on internal imagery or aphantasia, I cannot hold faces in my mind. That is, I can't see faces in my mind when I think of people. So if I think of Trish or my mum and dad or brother and sister, I can't bring an image of their face to mind. Now, to be clear, this does not mean I have a disconnect in those relationships. The fact is that when I think of these people or anyone else I know, I have a strong sense of who those people are and the closeness of those relationships. But just not the faces. Now, I need to clarify also at this point, as I am someone who has also had an occipital or vision stroke. So the question needs to be asked whether this is the cause of my face blindness. For me, quite clearly, I have always experienced this face issue, from as early in my life as I can remember. So, as for the case of my hypophantasia or lack of visual imagery, my prosopagnosia was not caused by the stroke. And I did ask a neurologist about my face blindness when I had the stroke, if there could be any link. But as I had clearly had that for a long time, he concluded that it was unrelated. Now, I have often had the experience of meeting someone at a conference, then 5 minutes later introducing myself to that same person again, failing to realise I was only just talking to them. Yep, awkward. In fact, in my former work, I represented that organisation at national and international conference events, so I was often placed in this uncomfortable position. Ironically though, these conferences were in the field of print disability. So at these conferences, I was interacting with many blind and vision impaired colleagues. I think this was actually really useful for me, as it taught me about how to interact with people who could not recognise me, and meant I had to take the lead in introduction, even with people I knew well, as they could not see me. I think this is a good analogue for someone interacting with a person with face blindness in needing to take that lead. Another common experience for me is when someone waves in my direction. I usually freeze as I have no idea if they're waving at me, as I don't recognise them. Then I subtly try and turn around to see if there is someone behind me waving back at the person. So many times I have awkwardly waved back only to then realise I was not the intended recipient. Yep, very embarrassing. On another tack, it is interesting that, as with many other autistic people, I am a watcher of my surroundings and people in general. By this I mean that as autistic people, we often find ourselves watching others intently in preference to interacting directly. This often means looking for patterns in our environments or indeed social interactions or crowded spaces to try and help us then interact with the people in those spaces. This watching can often mean I spot someone I think maybe is a person I know before they spot me, which is when the awkward internal struggle starts. Is that so-and-so? Should I go up and say hello? Wait a minute, I don't think it is them after all. Oh, I think it is them. I really should go and say something. Oh, they've gone. At this point, you might imagine that relief might be the emotion, that the interaction was avoided. After all, I'm autistic, so social interaction is not my forte. However, the reality is that shame is more likely to be the internal response. And this is an important point, because this internalised shame is not restricted to this type of interaction or non-interaction. This shame response is such a common autistic experience, when we're not able to access the world around us in ways that other people find trivial. When you think about it, so often an autistic person can't easily do what everyone else takes for granted. Say no to that really nice invitation to socialise. Shame. Go to a social event but have to escape because of overwhelm. Shame. Can't eat the food because of sensory sensitivity. Shame. Fail to interact in what is considered an appropriate way in the workplace and maybe lose a job. Shame. Maybe fail to go out and seek a job. More shame. I won't go on, but you get the idea. This shame response and subsequent anxiety and depression can be a very real result for so many autistic people, leading to health implications and ultimately contributing to the overall reduced life expectancy of autistic individuals. This issue of life expectancy is one I plan to return to in a future podcast, so I won't go into it in detail now, but it is an important point to note along the way. So how can you help your autistic friend, family member or work colleague when it comes to facial recognition difficulties? I think the first and most important step is just in awareness that this is such a common experience for autistic people. So watching or listening to this is a great first step. Thank you. Next comes attitude and understanding. In this, I fully acknowledge that all of us, autistic and non-autistic, are beings who may struggle with self-doubt. So when you see your autistic friend at the shops and they seem to snub you, the first and most natural response is to give in to that notion that this is what happened. After all, they may have looked directly at you in the face and then turned away without a hint of recognition. Yep, that is what we've been talking about. The fact is they're probably not sure if you are you, and maybe looked to try and see if there was some recognition from you first. If there was any delay at that point, then of course they will look or walk away. So as hard as it can be for all of us, please put aside your own self-doubt and take the lead, if of course you're wanting to say hello. If not, then that is no different than any other interaction with any other person you may decide to ignore. Okay, so what about in more formal settings like work, church, or community gatherings? This is where name tags can be really useful. Now, I know we all hate wearing name tags, the autistic person included, but it really does help the autistic person have certainty and clarity in those group type settings, reducing anxiety and shame. Sometimes it may be necessary to remind the autistic person of the context of the relationship. I've heard examples of teachers seeing a student at the local shops and needing to introduce themselves by saying, "Hi, I'm Mr. Smith, I'm your school teacher." This is perfectly okay. As an autistic person who struggles with facial recognition, if you are planning on meeting someone in public, it may be beneficial to let them know that you might find it difficult to recognise people in a crowd. This could save embarrassing moments where they might think you're ignoring them. So in summary, prosopagnosia, while more common in autistic people, is not specific to autism. And while it is common in autistic people, it is not a diagnostic prerequisite. In fact, some autistic people are hyper-recognisers. Again, I need to emphasise that all autistic people are different. And while face blindness is not part of the diagnostic criteria of autism, if you experience some degree of facial recognition difficulty and you are considering an autism assessment, it is useful extra information for the diagnosing professional to have about you. And finally, if we ignore you, don't take it personally. We're not snubbing you or being rude or aloof. We just might not be sure it is you. So come over and say hi. Okay, so that's it for now. Thanks for taking the time to listen. Please come and say hi in the comments section and feel free to share your experiences of prosopagnosia. We can't see each other in there, so it will all be fine. And as always, please subscribe and share for more ramblings of an older autistic bloke. Have a great week. See you next time. Actually, I can't actually see you. So no, you don't need to run and put some pants on. Okay, now this is just getting a bit weird. I'm going now. Bye.